Good morning, good evening, and good night, wherever you are. Today's video is going to be about sacred geometry. Sacred geometry has been around since, well, almost forever, at least in the Western thought. It's been around since the ancient Egyptians, since Pythagoras, and it has been used in ontology since forever. So I'll get right to it. So I hope I don't confuse people with how confused I myself am with this stuff. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not excellent at math, but I do have a few philosophical concepts of these things behind me. So here goes. So imagine an infinite line, and it goes infinitely to the left and infinitely to the right. And then you place a point. Is that point at the center? Sure, of course, you could say it's at the center. If you, because on the left it's infinite, and on the right it's infinite. And we could say it's at the center. So you take that same point that's at the center, and then you move it 10 meters to the right. Is it at the center? Well, it's moved relatively to the first center 10 meters. But if you take that point that after having been moved, you still have infinity to the left and infinity to the right. Now take that same point and move it 10 light years in that same direction. From where that point is, it still has infinity to the left and infinity to the right, because it's an infinite line. In whichever direction you go, it's always going to be, you're always going to be at the center with an infinity of linear length on both sides. And this is a very interesting concept. Every single point on that infinite line is technically the center of the line, the central division between two infinities. That's an interesting point, because what does that have to say about us human beings? We exist, presumably, in an infinite reality. And that means every single one of us, at every single point in time, is technically the center of the infinite. We are the central nexus of being from where we are, and for where anyone is, for that matter. Everybody you've ever known, every grain of sand, every fraction of an atom, every fraction of an electron is technically the center of the center of the universe. And that gives a very interesting point of importance. As everyone is the center of the universe, it kind of means that the world revolves around us. That has been seen a little bit in natal astrology. Now, a lot of people understand that it's been way dumbed down in the 19th and 20th century, more as a party gimmick and as a technique to sell newspapers. Effectively, however, natal astrology has a very interesting ontological point to make. It actually calculates the configuration of the quote-unquote known universe at the time of your birth. So what it means is that you are a very particular expression of the universe at that moment in time, at that geographic spot. On the exact same day, if you move 3 kilometers to the right, it will be a different natal chart than 3 kilometers to the left. The natal chart is about a snapshot of a moment in time. The whole configuration of the universe at that time, at that particular space, and that is where you come into existence. And as such, each and every human being is a representation of the complete universe at that particular moment, is a representation of the center of the universe. You are the center of the you are the center, or at least the object of the astrological chart. The whole zodiac is turning around you. The whole planets are turning around you. And you are that important in the infinite, so to speak, because you are that very, very moment. If you look at it mathematically, and this is something I found interesting, I had to verify with my girlfriend. She's got a master's in biochem and studied calculus and all that. With my little psychology, I don't know much about math, but if you mathematically divide infinity by 2, you get infinite, which is basically what I was expressing with the line. Now, if you take infinity and you divide infinity into an infinite number of parts, what do you get? Well, you still get infinity. Mathematically, you can express that. Say, if you get 2 divided by 1 over 2, or 1/2, then you get 4. So that whole divided by 1 over kind of makes multiplication. So if you take the infinity and you divide that by the smallest possible part of infinity, you split it into an infinite number of parts by calculating the smallest piece of infinity. That's basically 1 over infinity, the smallest possible fraction of infinity you can have. So you have infinity divided by 1 over infinity equals infinity to the power of infinity. Just like x divided by 1 over x equals x to the power of x, or x squared, or x divided by 1 over y equals to x to the power of y. If I'm wrong about my math, then someone please correct me, but I think that's correct. So basically, if you divide an infinite into an infinite number of parts, you get an infinity of infinities. And I'd like to illustrate why that is possible also. This is an example that was given by Ramsey Dukes. He said that every single number that we can conceive of, every single number can be conceived of as a length, and that length can be conceived of as a fraction of within the distance of 1 inch. So let's say pi, which is infinitely non-repeating decimal. You could simply say that you can have between 0 and 1 inch, you have pi length. So it's a number that continues on to infinity and never repeats itself, infinitely complex, but that length proportionately exists between 0 and 1 inch. And everything else. Ramsey Dukes was talking about the encoding of Mozart's orchestra. I don't think he was talking about Mozart. Anyways, Mozart's The Enchanted Flute, that can be converted into a number, like all of the vibrations of the notes and everything of every instrument. That can be converted to a number, whether it is a wave format on a CD. That is a number that can exist as a fraction of the distance between 0 and 1 inch. And so on and so forth for every single number that can be possibly conceived of. You have the positive number from 0 to 1, and the negative numbers, you just start from the other end and move on backwards. So essentially, if we say that there is an infinite number of numbers that exist out there, all of them fit within that definite length, which is 1 inch. But then again, you can have another inch right beside it. So infinity, or the infinite number of numbers, can also be expressed completely equal to it on the other side. They're both 1 inch. Infinity is equal to itself. So you have 1 inch here and 1 inch there. So you have infinity twice. 2 infinities. Well, how is that possible? So if we can even take that same 1 inch, and then you say, well, okay, we could put all of the numbers as a fraction of 1 inch, but you could also put all of the numbers as a fraction of half an inch. or as a fraction of an infinitely small distance of an inch. So when I say that infinity divided into an infinite number of infinities are all infinite in and of themselves. So how do we bring that back to ontology? So each and every one of us, that is the center of eternity, that is the center of infinity. Well, we can also be considered infinity ourselves, or at least an expression of infinity. At the same time, we are completely different from all other infinities. There's 1 inch beside another inch. Both of them are infinite. And paradoxically, we are exactly the same, because it's the same infinity of numbers that is covered in 1 inch that will also be in the other inch. And this I find a very interesting solution to an old dilemma. And this is, you'll see how this gets relevant to magic very soon. The whole idea of does otherness exist? Here's the thing. We're told by many spiritual things that all is one. We are all one consciousness experiencing itself collectively. It's all just one God that split himself up into an infinite. And so out of love, the God is kind of reuniting with himself and becoming complete again within nirvana or something like that. It's just one consciousness. Well, if that was exclusively true, well, we wouldn't exist. And I would say even some schools go so far as to say, well, the ego is an illusion. You are an illusion. You don't exist. You're just some sort of illusion that will disappear, and the only thing that will exist is that one mega consciousness. However, once you split that consciousness into an infinite number of parts, well, all of those consciousnesses are one in the sense that they are identical because they each contain infinity within themselves. So the principle of infinity is present inside each and every ontological point. And at the same time, paradoxically, each and every one of those infinities is distinct from each and every other infinity. So we have this paradox of being completely different and one and the same at the same time. So this old debate of we are all one, or do we exist? Well, it's a paradox, right? So does otherness exist? You know, is this all one big illusion, and it's actually one schizophrenic God that's hallucinating that he or she or it is something completely, is a whole bunch of fractured or consciousnesses all over, and at the end it's just one lonely consciousness that couldn't stand being alone because it is everything. And it's also a contrast to the whole idea of creationism. God saw that he was alone and he had to create something distinct, something other than him. And so Isaac de Luria, he is a Kabbalist from, I believe, the 12th or 13th century. What he did was he said, well, how can God, that is everything, create something than him when he is everything? So he called it the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is God that retreated part of himself within himself so that emptiness could exist. And because emptiness is logical absurdity, that emptiness was immediately filled with his light at the point of entry, which is Keter or Kether. And so then that's how you get that's one version of how you get the Kabbalistic tree of life. So the light comes in, and as a lightning, I think everybody's seen that little lightning on the Kabbalistic tree of life. So, it goes down Keter, Shakma, Bina, Gibura, Kesed, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and all the way to Malkut, where we are now. So that's one thing, and the whole idea of and this is another form of Christian mysticism, the death of God. God, that was everything. He could only create by dying, by killing himself. God was everything, was eternal. There could not be logically anything other than God. So God had to die for otherness to exist. And hence the whole symbolic representation of Christ on the cross was God that dies so that we may live. And because God had to create space for us to live, because God's fullness was filling up everything. So this whole thing that we are infinitely separate from another and fundamentally lonely and alone, and that we need to be saved in order to be reunited. Otherwise, we'll be in this eternal hell or something. That's the other side of it. You have this. So you have this complete separation on the one hand, and this we don't exist because we're not separated, and separation is an illusion on the other side that is reconciled by this whole consideration of sacred geometry on the infinite. So where did I get these crazy ideas? I didn't make them up. They are in part imparted to me by René Guénon. He's a French metaphysician. He wrote Le Symbolisme de la Croix, the symbolism of the cross. I know it's translated into English somewhere, but I really prefer reading this in the original language. Masterful writer, very, very intelligent man. He makes the longest sentences, though. At some point, it can be a bit tedious to read, but wow, you read that, I'm just always very impressed by how very thorough and how very logic he is. He doesn't skip a step. He just really guides you through it. And Le Symbolisme de la Croix is basically he describes with words a little bit of what I've been talking about, infinity, and that's pretty awesome. Another place, highly recommended reading, the Corpus Hermeticum, or Hermetica, the corpus of Hermetic writings. I read that so many years ago, I don't remember much of it, but I do remember how much it had influenced me. I guess I'll have to read that again sometimes. And of course, let me just plug this one. This is awesome. I won't say much more of that, but yeah, that's another thing that you might find very interesting if you want to go into ontology via sacred geometry. So here we go. So I was right here reconciling this whole idea of, there is no self, it's all an illusion, or there is a self, there's just no, you have to reintegrate this lost Garden of Eden, and we are completely separated and lost, and so on and so forth, and we need to be saved, which could be considered, the Eastern and the Western perspective, more or less. Notice I'm coming from the Western perspective, so they could be just two weird Western perspectives. One of them being perhaps an interpretation or an integration of some elements of the Eastern system, of which I'm not an expert at. Another way that I have chosen to reconcile this whole thing, does otherness exist? Are we completely alone, or are we just, or is there just one consciousness and we are just an illusion? And when we die, we will be part of that one universal cosmic consciousness, or whatnot. What I like to say, and this I tend to bring that back to the human side of things. I tend to say ipseity is proportional to alterity. I cannot know and I cannot understand more of the other than I can understand in myself. So the amount of infinity that I have assimilated, that I have grown into, or that I have the amount of complexity, the amount of understanding that I have reached is the exact same understanding that I use for myself and that I use for the other. And this idea kind of reconciles that paradox. So it's not necessarily I am such a small, insignificant speck in the universe and the other is so completely awesome. The other will always present itself to the self as the self can present itself to the other. It will always be a proportion, I would say a reciprocal or a mutual proportion. I like to consider that the intersubjectivist model of reality. And here's another way I do like to reconcile is this whole idea that uh, reality is not some big imposed matrix, some big, whether it be a Western one gone that tells you how it is. It's not this Western society's mechanical universe with universal physical laws that apply everywhere, and you can't really get out of it, and everything is matter and energy and information, and those physical laws governing reality are universal, and that is that. Nor is it like this one big cosmic consciousness in which we're stuck into and that we can't escape. So it's this whole idea that I think society likes to throw that at us a lot. These whether it be objective reality that tells you the truth and that's how it is, and we have to discover that truth. Uh, what if what if there was no unifying total matrix of reality that is what is? What if there was no authority? What if there was just an infinite number of infinities relating to each other? I don't know how clear that is. Basically, what I'm saying is we're not inside something. We're not like people will even say, well, this reality is just a computer simulation within an alien hard drive. Okay, let's say it is. Let's say that was actually factual. Well, those aliens would just be asking themselves the exact same questions that we are. Are they, in also in this sort of universal matrix of reality where there is one reality that applies everywhere, and that reality is infinite, and you can't get out of reality because that's the only thing that's real because it's infinite? Well, that's a little bit what I'm putting aside. Um, I'm thinking of infinity divided into an infinite number of parts, and which are the smallest pieces of infinity possible. I call that the ontological point. The most simple, the smallest, the least possible dimensions, save for being. And that's the ontological point. It's just one dot, and its only property is to be. And there's an infinite number of that within infinity, and in that to be is basically infinity in itself for the reasons that I said before. And so all of these points, which are theoretically identical and paradoxically theoretically completely separate and different, the only way that a reality can emerge is through this mutuality. So the relationship that these ontological points have together is what determines the emergence of that reality. Let's put it back into human terms. If we humans treat each other like crap, well, what's going to happen? We're going to have a crap society. That's what religion's been saying forever. I know this is cliche a little bit, but how we treat the others is essentially how we create others, how we create reality, how we create well, the world, being in general. And this goes a little bit with what I was saying. Remember the other video about instrument bias, we only detect the world as we measure it. We only understand the other as we are, and we can only be as much as we understand the other. We grow with otherness. Our infinity is identical to all other infinities, and reality would be an emergent property of all of those relationships between those ontological points. Much like the reality of this individual, flesh and bone, is actually just a conglomeration of a whole bunch of cells, which are also infinitely individual, infinitely separate, but also paradoxically one guy sitting in front of a camera with a nice hat. If Dave, if you're watching this, yes, I still think it's a nice hat. Thank you very much. So anyways, to get back, to bring this all down to magic. So first, just one of my favorite psychological quotes. I think it was the inventor of logotherapy. I forget what his name was right now. He quoted who he said was Goethe. He said, treat someone how they ought to be, and you help them become who they are capable of being. And that really hit me. So how you treat the other transforms the other, and how the other treats me transforms me. And that, I believe, is a very important proponent of magic. How we relate to reality transforms reality. I am an infinite with infinite potential. I have potentially infinity within me, and there's infinity which is exactly the same as me because it's all one infinity within infinity, and which is infinitely different than me at the same time, and how I relate to that changes both of us. I think it was Carl Jung that said the meeting of two personalities is like the meeting of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both substances are changed forever. So this idea of magic as infinite potential interrelating with other infinite potentials, and that relationship basically comes to change what that reality is. How I relate to reality changes reality. Now, I'm pretty sure the conclusion that I'm coming to is something that you've read a lot, that you've heard a lot, but I hope this is the first time that you you hear somebody say that from a strictly ontological sacred geometry point of view. Another very, very interesting tradition that I very much enjoy, and oh, that's a book I should have brought. Anyways, I'll link it in the comment below. It's actually the Gnostic theory that tries to reconcile an infinite number of distinct points and this one reality that encompasses all. They came up with emanationism. Emanationism is that the greatest God that can be conceived is that which cannot be conceived. So they call him or her or it or that, or they call the ultimate ineffable depth. So ineffable depth, Kabbalah assimilated that as the Ein Sof. So ineffable depth is where everything comes from, and from that ineffable depth, it basically emanates. So how should I say it? It's kind of like when you go on YouTube and you look at that Mandelbrot fraction where you're always zooming in, and it's always just coming out with new permutations of the Mandelbrot fractal. And it's kind of like that. They see it, except it starts from this ineffable depth, which is God, and then you have all of these aeons that spew out, and then they spew out a whole bunch more of them. And each aeon spews out more aeons, and then they just come up and say, well, your goal, the the Gnostic goal of existence is that as an emanation of an emanation of an emanation ad infinitum, all the way from the first emanation, which comes from ineffable depth, so we don't know where. Our job is to basically get into this knowledge of this hierarchy and just kind of climb up the hierarchy so that we become big enough so that we can emanate ourselves new realities and just continue the creative act of God, which is, of course, going to be infinite. And from ourselves, we'll have an infinite number of emanations that will then become gods also, which will emanate more realities and therefore creating all that is possible. Of course, different Gnostic schools will have different ideas, and some of those emanations will have distinct numbers. The crown of 12, which will be, of course, the zodiac, and there's the 7 emanations, which are or the 7 archons, which are emanations of something prior. Naturally, the 7 archons, which are the 7 planets. 7 planets, if we bring that back to the traditional natal horoscope, the archons, how they are positioned in a unique way in a particular moment in time, on a particular geographic place, making this very, very unique combination, and so on and so forth. Us being, kind of like on the lower end of the emanations, but that's okay because we're just going to be rise in greatness ourselves and become, emanationers or gods that emanated or aeons ourselves. And the whole idea, the redemption is understanding this process and understanding how to climb up the hierarchy into making each other greater. And we can see how Gnosticism, remember what I was talking about, the tradition that was Egyptian, Greek, and Gnostic, and Hermetic, that went into Kabbalah, and that went into Christianity after. This is one of the traditions that really, really kept itself going for thousands and thousands of years. This whole idea of does another exist? Is there such a thing as somebody else, or is there just this one consciousness? And the idea, of course, is basically to reconcile the two and understand the coexistence of all is one, and yes, we do exist. We are real. We are somebody. We are indeed the central nexus of the universe, each and every one of us. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like Terence McKenna. He would base his, he'd go into the same kinds of arguments as I'm going into sometimes, and he would say, well, he would say to everyone, you matter, you are important. The fact that you are here now or that you exist is something meaningful, and it's something that actually has importance in the whole development of the universe. And I think this is one thing that magical philosophy has that is different and unique, and that has something to give to society in a way that, yes, you matter, you really exist, you really, really are somebody important, you are here right now. You are not an illusion despite being an illusion because you are not an illusion, I mean, if we are just illusions, are illusions real? If an illusion is real, then is it really an illusion? But if an illusion is not real, then there is no illusion because it's not real. So anyways, this whole idea that we are important, that we matter, we are actually part of this creative expanse. Now, this doesn't give any information about life after death, of course, or the mysteries of death. This is unfortunately something I only have some sort of unverified personal gnosis coming from weird life experiences and magical experiences. I guess I shouldn't go into that so much. My conclusion is that death is still an impenetrable mystery for humanity. But in as much as scientific epistemology can come up, if we remember another video, can come up with the idea of well, if there's a structure in the brain, maybe that structure has a function, and maybe that function has something to do with something that we can't detect scientifically. The same thing with ontology. You know, if we can understand a part of being, well, maybe that gives us a hint about something beyond our capacity of sight. I forgot who said that. It was something in the neighborhood of death is a horizon, and what is a horizon? Say the limit of one's sight. I always found that quite interesting. So essentially, I guess if I'm to summarize, I do think sacred geometry is very important in the ontology of magic because it does give us a hint that yes, as I would say the conclusions that it comes as per our own existence is also an interesting formula for letting magic exist. It's not something that will necessarily box us in like these real realities that are outside of us and that control us and that basically we're stuck into and we have to obey its laws or whatever. Magic comes from, I think, an ontology or a comprehension of the world that acknowledges that humans, yes, we exist, yes, we are important, yes, we have something to do, yes, we can do, yes, we do have infinity within each and every one of us, and our infinities can interact with the infinities or the infinity of the universe just as well and continue the creative process or continue the logos, of which we are a part of which we are the creator, the instigator, but also independent completely, so we can bring that in whichever direction we can. So I guess this concludes the video for today. The next video will be about existentialism. So I'll make another few links to the earlier videos there. I wish you all good evening, good day, and good morning, whichever comes first for you. Take care.